everybody? My name is Mars. You can call me MG if you would like, and today I have for you my August wrap up and September TBR. So, September, very exciting. It is the Magical Readathon. Usually that happens in August each year, but it had to be postponed. So, I am so excited. I already have my entire TBR picked out for that, but that will be a separate video. Otherwise, this one would be insanely long. So, stay tuned for that. Before I even get to my actual TBR for this, though, we do have to go over all the books I read in August, and it was honestly so much more than I expected. So, without any further ado, why don't we start talking about these books? So, first up, I actually have an entire series. This is the Parasol Protectorate by Gail Carriger. Still not sure how to pronounce that, but I binged all five of these books. I think it was over the course of like 6 or 7 days because I was just eating them up. I'm going to actually only hold up the first one because they are heavy. So we have vampires and werewolves and ghosts in Victorian London, and we follow our main character who has no soul, and because of this, she's immune to all of the supernatural stuff, which is such an amazing concept. I've really been loving historical fantasy lately, and this was no exception. I adored this series. I actually vlogged my reading of it, so I will leave that down in the description for you guys to check out if you haven't already, and that way you can know my play-by-play thoughts as I read the series. But yeah, overall, this was a great start to the month. Then I picked up The Host by Stephanie Meyer, which was the Nostalgia Train book club pick for the month, and unfortunately, I DNF'd this at about 26%. I just could not get behind the romance aspect of this. It was just too much for me. And I also have come to the realization because of this book and others that I've read in the past that I'm just not a fan of books where there's some foreign entity in the main character's head. So this book is about this alien race that's come to Earth, and they like get implanted in the humans and kind of take over their mind and body, and the human part is erased, but something strange has happened with this main character where the human who this alien is planted into isn't erased, so they're both living in the same head, and I realized I don't like stories like that. So for a lot of reasons, I put this book down, and I am only upset about it because it was a book club pick, and I would have liked to talk about all of that with everybody, but for story reasons, I'm not upset about putting this down. After a DNF, I always try to pick up a book I know I'll love, and so I picked up The Lost Hero by Rick Riordan. This is book one in the Heroes of Olympus series, so it's the sequel series to Percy Jackson, and I recently reread all 5 Percy Jackson books. Now I'm rereading this series so that I can get to the newer Percy Jackson books. One was published last year, there's one this year, and I think a third one next year, but they follow Percy as the main character, but they take place after this series, so a reread was in order, and I was not disappointed by this. It was so good. I truly think I have a better appreciation for Jason, Piper, and Leo after this reread. I always loved them as characters, but I really feel connected to them after this reread, so very excited to continue on with that. Then I picked up The Dry by Jane Harper, which is a mystery book. It's set in Australia because the author's Australian, and it's fine. It wasn't really my thing. I read this for a reading challenge, and I didn't hate it. I mean, I read the whole thing. I'm just kind of over reading about men whose tragic backstories involve dead women. And this main character, his tragic backstory involves 2 dead women, his mother and his high school girlfriend. So, love that. I don't, especially. So, I just wasn't hugely into this, and I don't think I'll be reading the other books in the series. Then I was in the mood for some poetry, so I read 100 Love Sonnets by Pablo Neruda, and this was fun. This was a reread for me, and I do love Pablo Neruda's works. It's just that the poems that I know I absolutely adore from him, for example, Tonight I Can Write the Saddest Lines, that's one of my favorite poems of all time, those just aren't in this because this is a very specific collection of his works, and I prefer other things he's written. So I actually think I might be unhauling this because I feel like someone else out there would enjoy this way more than I did, and there are plenty of free little libraries around me. So free little libraries, little free libraries. I think it's little free libraries, but yeah, this is probably going to be an unhaul, not because I didn't enjoy it, just because I think someone else would enjoy it more. Next up, we have Notes on an Execution by Danya Kakavka, and this was another book that was just fine. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really love it. I thought there were a lot of interesting concepts going on, but they kind of fell flat in execution, if you don't mind the incidental pun. I just wasn't fully involved in this. It felt like it was trying to be commentary on a lot of things, but didn't really push hard enough to really hit that. So overall, not my favorite, but I can definitely see how it would work for other people. Then I picked up European Travel for the Monstrous Gentlewoman by Theodora Goss. This is book 2 in the Athena Club series, which follows the daughters of like famous gothic scientists like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Frankenstein and Dr. Moreau, among others. And this was fine. It was kind of a disappointment after reading book 1 because I read book 1 and absolutely loved it. I thought it was so good. This book, first of all, it felt so bloated. Book 1 is just over 400 pages, and I looked it up, and book 3 is also somewhere in the 400s. This book was almost 800 pages long. So I feel like it either needed to be slimmed, because there were some things that probably could have been cut, or split into two, because there is an actual break put into this book. There's part 1 and part 2, and I feel like with some editing, those could have been two separate books. And I don't know why they didn't do that. I feel like it would have helped the pacing and the flow so much. So it's just overall not my favorite. I will be continuing the series though, because I'm so excited to see how it all plays out in the end of this trilogy. And I did love the first one so much that I'm like disappointed by this one, but I didn't hate it. Next, we're getting into all of the books that I read for the Summer Scare Readathon, which was a fantastic time as always. I also vlogged that experience for you guys to check out. So the first 2 books I read for that were the first 2 books in the My Sister the Vampire series. So I read book 1, Switched, as an ebook, and then I have book 2, Fantastic, as a physical book. These are middle grades. They're very short, as you can tell, very easy, but there is like a connecting plot line throughout, and this follows 2 sisters, Ivy and Olivia. Ivy's a vampire and Olivia's a human, and they like meet each other and realize that they are twins that were separated and adopted into different families. And it's just overall a cute, fun time, and I'm very intrigued in continuing the series, honestly. I want to know where it all ends up. Then I read Smashed by Junji Ito, which was kind of a disappointment to me. This was the second Junji Ito story collection I've read. The first one, Shiver, I thought was so good, with the exception of like 2 of the stories in it. This one, I didn't really love any of the stories that were included, and most of them were kind of meh. They didn't really go anywhere for me. It's just more like, here's a thing that's happening, wild, and it wasn't like a story, you know? So overall, I didn't hate this, but like several other books I read this month, it was kind of just a thing that I read. After that, I picked up Return of the Temujai by John Flanagan. This is book 8 in the Brother Band Chronicles. I've been reading 1 book a month in this series throughout the whole year, and it was just a real fun time, as always. It's definitely not my favorite in the series, but it's not bad by any means. It just didn't do a lot of new things that I would have liked to see. It was kind of middle of the road, but for John Flanagan, a middle of the road to me is still a really good book, so I enjoyed it. Then I listened to the audiobook for Where Darkness Blooms by Andrea Hanna, and let me consult my reading journal. There were 4 narrators because there are 4 main characters, so this was narrated by Sarah Beth Pfeiffer, Emily Ellett, Lindsay Dorcas, and Rashane Lumeno. They did a fantastic job. I loved all 4 of them and how well they like embodied these characters. So I'm not usually an audiobook person, but in this case, I had a great time with this. And this story was really good. I think if you're a fan of Crystal Sutherland's book, The Invocations, or Delicious Monsters by Lizelle Sambury, you should check this book out. I also am using it as a comp title for one of my own stories because it really has the same kind of vibe and themes to it. So very exciting. I did not go into this thinking it would be a comp title, but it really does work. Then I read Wolf Children, which is a short manga about a woman raising 2 half-wolf kids, and it was cute. It was very slice of life, And the second of the three volumes is definitely the best. The first and the third kind of aren't as good, but it's still very sweet, very cute if you're looking for something short to read. Then we have my last physical read of the month, which was Young Goodman Brown and Other Short Stories by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and I enjoyed this so much more than I thought I would. It was a little bit tough to read because this was written in the 1800s, so there's a bit of a language issue there. But I still thought some of these stories were really interesting and really cool. I've never read Nathaniel Hawthorne before, so I'm glad I finally gave him a shot. Then I picked up another short manga, and this is Summer Ghost, and there's only two volumes, and this was so much sadder than I expected, but it was still so good and so beautiful. I really loved it. If you have read or seen the movies for Your Name and Weathering with You, I feel like this would also be your vibe. The next book I picked up was Leather and Lark by Bryn Weaver, and I was so scared going into this because there were some things on the content warning list that kind of freaked me out, but it wasn't really that bad in the actual story. It seemed like it was going to be worse than it was. And this was another book that kind of fell flat for me. I feel like I didn't connect to the characters as much, and their pacing was just really off. There wasn't a lot of tension in the first half of the book, and the second half did pick up, it did get better, but overall, this just didn't live up to book one, and I'm really sad about that. The next book I read was The Whispering Dark by Kelly Andrew, and this was recommended to me by my dear friend Violet almost a year ago. Back in December, she gave me a list of 10 books that she thinks I would really like, and I finally read one off the list, and I did really, really like this. This is a dark academia with like a sci-fi element to it, and it has a deaf main character. The author is also deaf, so it has that personal experience, and this was just so good. The setup to it is a little bit like disjointed and confusing, and that's the only thing preventing this book from getting a 10 out of 10 because I adored every other aspect of it. And we have three more books to get through, so almost through this portion of it. The next book is the last book that I finished in the month, and that is Barbarian Lover by Ruby Dixon. This is book 3 in the Ice Planet Barbarians. So good. So good. I really, really enjoyed this. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as book two. Book two is probably still my favorite, but this is also like a 20 something book series, so that is liable to change at any moment. But I really enjoyed this. Kira and I'm not gonna try and pronounce the alien man's name. They're so sweet, so cute together. I really enjoyed it, so I'm glad that this is still a series that I'm having a great time with. Then we come to the book I'm currently reading, which is A Crane Among Wolves by June Her, and I'm so close to finishing this. I'm like two-thirds of the way through and having a great time. I'm definitely gonna finish it today because it's a very quick read. This is a retelling of Emperor Yonsan, I think is his name. His reign, he's like the most infamous emperor in Korean history, and we follow Isul, who is trying to get her sister back. She was taken by the king to be one of his like thousands of courtesans, and we also follow Daehyun, who is one of the king's half brothers. He's like an illegitimate bastard, and they are both trying to work on their own thing, but then there's also this murder mystery that kind of ties them together, and I cannot wait to see how this plays out in the end. And then finally, the last book that I'm going to read in this month is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and I will be reading it this month because it is the Bujo Buddies book club pick, so I kind of have to get it done. And I will be listening to this as an audiobook, which is a little bit scary, but that's the only way I could find it. And I will leave a comment down below with my thoughts on it because obviously I don't know how I'm going to feel because I haven't read it yet, but I want you guys to know. So I'll probably like pin a comment with how I feel about that book once I'm done, and also my final thoughts on A Crate Among Wolves. So if you're seeing this before that comment is there, just come back and check it out so you know my final thoughts. And at long last, we come to the portion of this video where I will pick my books for next month's TBR. So, like I said, I am participating in the Magical Readathon, and I have a whole list of books that I'm going to be reading for that. So hopefully the prompts that I pull from my cards will allow me to pick from those so I don't have to add too many, but we'll just have to see. I'm going to split the deck so you know I'm not cheating, and we'll see what my three cards are. First, we have the Two of Fiends. Then we have the Warlock. And finally, our third pull for September is the Four of Giants. This one's gonna be a rough one. The Giants have to do with the size of the book, and the Four of Giants is a big old chunky book, so I'm gonna go look at my books and figure out what I'm gonna read for these and come back to talk to you about them. Okay, friends, we are back. I managed to fit 2 books from a Magical Readathon TBR into these TBR game prompts, so did pretty well with that. I only had to add 1 book, and it's one that I'm hesitantly excited for, but we'll get to that when we get there. First, let's start with the first card I pulled, which was the Two of Fiends, and the prompt for this is to read the first book in a series. I actually have several of those on my TBR for next month because of the Magical Readathon, so I had quite the choice to make, and I ended up putting The Diviners by Libba Bray in this official spot here because it was the closest to me on the shelf, so nothing special. I'm reading a ton of first books in series, and this is just the one I grabbed, but this is a historical fantasy, which we've already established I've been adoring lately, so I have very high hopes for this one. So that is my first pick. Then we had the Warlock. Because this is a class card, there are 2 prompt options I could pick from. The first option is a book that would be on a school curriculum, and the second option is a book that has personally been recommended to me. And that's the one I decided to go with because my friend Violet recommended all those books to me at the end of last year, and I have to get a move on reading them. So the book I have slotted in for this prompt is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, which is the one that I'm hesitantly excited for because it does sound so good. But I have read T. Kingfisher before, only 1 book, but I read What Moves the Dead, and it just wasn't it for me. I feel like it just didn't hit what I expected it to. So while Nettle and Bone sounds really good, I am worried that this is going to happen again. So let's hope I really enjoy this book. But then we have The Four of Giants, which, like I said, has to do with the size of a book. So The Four of Giants is a book that is 600 pages or more. Thankfully, I had one on my TBR, and that is Quicksilver by Callie Hart, and according to Goodreads, the Kindle edition is 670 pages, so it fits. This book is the Bujo Buddies book club pick for the month, so I'd be reading it no matter what. I'm very glad that I managed to get it on this TBR and the Magical Readathon TBR, because if I had to read a whole bunch of books and then this one on top of it, I'm not sure if I would have made it, but thankfully I had a book and I didn't have to add another 600-page behemoth to this TBR. So I've only got 1 book to hold up for you for the wrap-up portion of this video, but at least it's a very pretty cover. The other 2 books I'll be reading as ebooks. So, like I said, stay tuned for my Magical Readathon TBR. That will be coming out very shortly, and it will feature The Diviners and Quicksilver along with 10 other books, so it'll be quite the time. I'm very excited for my reading in September. I think a lot of these books are going to be ones that I love, or at least I hope so. But that is the end of this video now. If you've enjoyed it, be sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can subscribe to my channel for more content, and that way I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye everyone!